Spring of 1956. On the Warner Brothers backlot, two men stand next to each other during a break between shots. One of them is a studio grip, 6 feet tall, and standing beside his co-worker, he looks like a kid. The other is Clint Walker, 6'6", 235 pounds, with a 48-inch chest. In the photo, he doesn't just look bigger. He looks like he belongs to an entirely different category of human being. That gap right there was Hollywood's most stubborn physical problem throughout the Golden Age. What exactly does a studio do with a star whose body simply doesn't fit the frame? The standard cinema frame was never designed with giants in mind. Drop a 6.5-foot man into a scene and the whole visual geometry falls apart. Directors were literally digging trenches in the ground so these actors could stand lower than their co-stars. Cinematographers bent their angles into strange new shapes. Entire technical crews burned their time and ingenuity, not on crafting better stories, but on solving the basic question of how to get these men on screen without breaking the illusion. 9 of them figured out how to make it work anyway. 9 men, all 6'4" or taller, who refused to be shrunk down and built careers that the industry still talks about. Here's what happened to each of them. James Arness stood 6 feet 7 inches tall. The United States Army found a use for that height that no studio casting director ever would have dreamed up. On the 22nd of January 1944, Allied forces hit the beach at the Anzio beachhead in Italy. Among the very first men off the landing craft was a 20-year-old private from Minneapolis named James Arness. He was born in 1923 into a family of Norwegian descent. When he tried to enlist in the Navy, they turned him away. At 6'7", he was already too tall for an aircraft cockpit. The Army, though, had something specific in mind for a man his size. At Anzio, the water depth at the landing point was unknown, and someone had to wade in first to find out where the floor was. That job went to Arness. He was the tallest man available, so he went in ahead of everyone else. 10 days after the landing, during a night engagement in a vineyard, he was hit by machine gun fire. The shot shattered his lower leg. A concussion grenade threw him off his feet. He survived, went through multiple surgeries, and received an honorable discharge in January 1945. The leg never fully healed. For the rest of his life, through 20 years of riding horses across a television western set, Arness lived with chronic pain in that leg and almost never brought it up. He hitchhiked out to Hollywood in 1946. His first real breakthrough came in 1951, playing the monstrous alien in Howard Hawks's The Thing from Another World. The casting decision came down entirely to his size. The creature needed to be enormous, and Arness fit that requirement like no one else could. He had no lines in the film and spent his scenes buried inside a costume that covered his face completely. The movie landed well with audiences, and Hawks mentioned Arness to John Wayne. Wayne brought him on under a personal contract. In 1955, CBS came to Wayne with an offer: the lead role of Marshal Matt Dillon in a new Western called Gunsmoke. Wayne turned the role down. He was too deeply rooted in feature films to gamble on a television series, but he did appear in the premiere episode's introduction and put Arness forward as his pick for the lead. It was, Wayne would later say, the simplest recommendation he ever gave. Gunsmoke ran for 20 years and 635 episodes. Arness was in every single one. He played Matt Dillon, a man of few words, enormous presence, and an unshakable moral code. Over 5 decades, he had a way of walking into a room that made everyone else seem smaller, and that wasn't a camera trick. Arness created that effect himself, without appearing to try. By all accounts, he was a deeply private person. He kept reporters off the set entirely, and TV Guide once dubbed him the Greta Garbo of Dodge City. Outside of work, he enjoyed poetry, yacht racing, and surfing. He passed away in June 2011 at the age of 88. Matt Dillon was the only character he ever needed to play. Number 2 is Clint Walker, 6 feet 6 inches tall. He was born Norman Eugene Walker in Hartford, Illinois in 1927 and dropped out of high school at 16. At 17, he signed on with the Merchant Marine. In the years that followed, he worked cargo ships on the Great Lakes, riverboats along the Mississippi, oil fields in Texas, and a paper mill out in the Pacific Northwest. With no gym to speak of, he made his own weights out of concrete and trained with them. By his early 20s, he had a 48-inch chest, a 32-inch waist, and stood 6 feet 6 inches in bare feet. He eventually landed a security job at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, where several Hollywood figures, including actor Van Johnson, told him his physical presence could translate into a career. Walker ran the numbers in his head. It paid better than oil field labor, and the bullets were fake. He packed up and moved to Los Angeles. His first credit was an uncredited Tarzan appearance in a Bowery Boys comedy. His second opportunity came when Cecil B. DeMille was pulling in muscular extras for The 10 Commandments. On the day of his audition, Walker pulled over on the way to Paramount to help a woman change a flat tire and showed up late. DeMille cast him anyway. In 1955, Warner Brothers gave him the lead in Cheyenne, the first hour-long Western ever made for television. He played Cheyenne Bodie, a drifter in the post-Civil War era who had been raised by the Cherokee people after they killed his parents. The character's quiet, watchful patience fit Walker's natural stillness like a glove. Cheyenne ran for 7 seasons. The studio leaned heavily on Walker's physique, writing in bare-chested scenes that didn't ask much of him as an actor, but consistently delivered strong audience numbers. In 1958, he and Warner Brothers hit a wall over his contract. Walker wouldn't agree to the terms being offered. The studio suspended him, and a replacement was brought in. Ratings dropped right away. The studio came back with a better deal, and Walker came back to the role. In 1971, he survived a skiing accident at Mammoth Mountain that most people wouldn't have walked away from. A ski pole drove straight into his heart. He was pronounced dead at the scene. A doctor found a pulse. Surgeons went in and repaired the damage. 2 months later, he was back at work. He died in May 2018, 9 days short of his 91st birthday. His size hadn't changed. Number 3 on this list, Chuck Connors, 6 feet 5 inches tall. Kevin Joseph Connors was born in Brooklyn in 1921 to Irish immigrant parents and raised in Bay Ridge. His athletic gifts showed up early. By his late teens, that height and coordination had built a body capable of things most people simply weren't. He played professional basketball for the Boston Celtics and professional baseball for the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Chicago Cubs. That puts him among just 13 athletes in documented American sports history to have competed professionally in both the NBA and Major League Baseball. That's a short list, and he's on it. During a 1946 warm-up at Boston Garden, he went up for a dunk and pulled the backboard clean off the wall. He was the first player in basketball history to break one. He didn't mean to, he just jumped. His path into acting came through baseball, almost by accident. A casting director from MGM spotted him in 1952 and flagged him for a small part in a Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn comedy. 4 minutes of screen time. He found, to his own surprise, that he liked it. He walked away from professional sports and didn't look back. In 1958, ABC offered him the lead in a new Western called The Rifleman. He said no. The money wasn't there, and freelance work was paying better at the time. The producers then took their own kids to see Old Yeller, where Connors played a father figure with quiet precision. They watched him, went back to the table, and came back with a better number. He took it. The character was Lucas McCain, a widowed rancher raising his son alone in 1880s New Mexico. Connors played him for 5 seasons. The show's signature image was an opening sequence where he spun and fired a modified Winchester with speed and accuracy that wasn't entirely staged. Connors had trained on that rifle. He wanted those moves to be real. They were. The Rifleman ran from 1958 to 1963 and holds a specific distinction. It was the first American network series built around a single father raising a child without a mother present. What Connors brought to it was a combination the role genuinely needed. The physical size made the threat believable. The emotional openness made the fatherhood feel honest. A man that large, being that tender, communicated something a smaller man simply couldn't carry the same way. When Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev restricted American television from Soviet broadcast, one show got through. The Rifleman was Brezhnev's personal favorite, and it was the single exception he allowed. In December 1973, Connors traveled to Moscow as the show's representative. No embellishment is needed here. He died in November 1992, and his tombstone carries a photograph of him as Lucas McCain, alongside the logos of 3 professional sports franchises. 3 careers captured in images. Number 4 is Forrest Tucker. All 6 feet 5 inches of him arrived in Hollywood in 1940, carrying a powerful build, a baritone voice, and a personal history that studios found far easier to overlook than to actually examine. He was born in Plainfield, Indiana, in 1919. He ran away from home at 17 and spent his early years working carnivals and county fairs across the Midwest, with the easy confidence of someone who always knew exactly what he looked like. The Army claimed him young. By the time the film industry took notice, he'd already lived inside the improvisational economy of America's margins, in ways that studio publicity departments simply weren't built to handle. Columbia signed him, and he was immediately useful as a villain, what the industry called a heavy. Directors needed men who could project threat without trying too hard, and Tucker's frame let him do exactly that. He played villains, then complicated men, then heroes, cycling through the available categories with a matter-of-fact practicality the industry quietly respected. He wasn't a delicate actor, not by any stretch. He had physical command of any space he entered, and a genuine ease in his own skin that translated directly to camera. When he was funny, which was often, he was genuinely funny. When he was menacing, no stunt coordinator was required. His most prominent work came late in his career. From 1965 to 1967, he played Sergeant Morgan O'Rourke on F Troop, the ABC comedy western. The role asked him to be the calm center around which everything else fell apart. His size in a comedic setting produced a completely different kind of authority, not threat, but steadiness. He was the joke and the straight man at the same time. Tucker died in 1986 after a career spanning nearly 50 years and more than 100 productions. He was never the most celebrated person in any room, but he was consistently, reliably there, a quality the industry used freely without always acknowledging it. Number 5 is Rock Hudson, standing 6 feet 4 to 5 inches tall. His real name was Roy Harold Scherer Jr., and he grew up in Winnetka, Illinois, the only child of a father who walked out on the family during the Depression. He became Roy Fitzgerald after his mother remarried. The professional name came later, assembled by an agent named Henry Wilson from the Rock of Gibraltar and the Hudson River, because Wilson believed a name should announce something grander than the person carrying it. Hudson attended New Trier High School and never landed a single school play role because he couldn't hold on to his lines. After his Navy service in the Philippines, Hudson came to Los Angeles in 1946, tried and failed to get into USC's drama program, and spent his early days driving a truck. In 1948, he crossed paths with agent Henry Wilson. Wilson recognized exactly what he was looking at, a 6'4" frame and a face the camera would adore, attached to someone who couldn't act yet. Those two things didn't cancel each other out. Universal signed him anyway. His very first scene, in his very first film, Fighter Squadron, in 1948, called for him to deliver a single line. It took 38 takes before they got one they could use. What Wilson had bet on was that Hudson could learn. He was disciplined, he was committed, and he had a physical presence that could carry him while the actual craft caught up. Director Douglas Sirk put him in Magnificent Obsession in 1954, playing a reckless playboy who blinds a woman in an accident and then falls in love with her. The role asked a lot of him emotionally. He delivered. The film turned him into a genuine star. Giant, 2 years later, earned him his only Academy Award nomination. And looking back, it's the performance that showed most clearly what he was truly capable of when the right material found him. By 1959, he'd moved into romantic comedy. Pillow Talk opposite Doris Day pulled in $18.75 million at the box office, and locked in a comic screen persona, the studio leaned on hard, pairing him with Day across 3 films in 4 years. From 1959 through 1963, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association named him World Film Favorite 4 years running. Away from the public eye, Hudson was living a private life that would have destroyed everything if any of those fan magazines had printed what they knew. He was gay. The industry was aware, kept it quiet, and used that silence to its own advantage. In 1955, when Confidential magazine moved to publish material about his sexuality, his agent killed the story by handing over damaging information about 2 other clients, Rory Calhoun and Tab Hunter. That same year, Hudson married his agent's secretary, Phyllis Gates. The marriage lasted 3 years. In June 1984, a doctor found a lesion that indicated AIDS. Hudson kept it to himself for 14 months. Then in July 1985, he appeared at a press conference alongside Doris Day. His appearance, gaunt and visibly diminished, went out on national broadcasts and was replayed again and again. For most Americans, it was the first time they had seen what AIDS looked like on a face they actually knew. He died on the 2nd of October, 1985, at 59 years old. He was the first major Hollywood celebrity to die of AIDS-related complications. What that single moment of public visibility did for awareness of the disease is something no number can fully account for. 6 feet 4 inches. That's where Jeff Chandler started, and that's not the smallest thing about him. Ira Grossel came into the world in Brooklyn in 1918, the son of Jewish immigrants who had made their way over from Eastern Europe. The Depression didn't wait long to find his family. He came up hard, found work in radio, and eventually took the advice of an agent who told him plainly that Ira Grossel wasn't a name that would open doors. Jeff Chandler was. Hollywood came next. He brought that 6'4" frame with him, and something else the publicity department couldn't stop talking about. His hair had gone silver while he was still a young man. By his early 30s, he had the body of someone in his prime and the hair of someone decades older. It was a striking combination, and the studios noticed immediately. Universal signed him in the late 1940s and put that image to work right away. He played men of authority, men with weight and experience behind them. The silver hair did the work before he even said a word. His real breakthrough arrived in 1950 with Broken Arrow, a Western directed by Delmer Daves, where Chandler played Cochise, the Apache chief, alongside James Stewart. That casting belongs to its era and wouldn't happen today, but Chandler's performance was good enough to earn him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He was 32 years old. It was his first major film role. Universal kept him busy through the decade, cycling him through westerns, war pictures, and adventure films. He had the tools for it. That voice was low and steady, unhurried, matching the silver hair perfectly. He worked best when a role gave him room to be still and carry the scene without much fuss. He was less comfortable when the material asked for something more technically layered. The studio put him in 15 films over 8 years, and almost none of them pushed him anywhere new. What nobody said out loud, including Chandler himself, was that the roles were getting smaller in scope, even as his presence stayed large. The silver hair had locked him into a type. He fit that type without question. The type just wasn't going anywhere. In 1961, he tried something different with a romantic comedy called Portrait of a Mobster, looking for room to stretch. The reviews made clear it hadn't worked. He was playing a character written for a man barely out of his 20s. That same year, in April 1961, complications developed during surgery for a back condition. He never came out the other side. He died that June at 42, having made 53 films. The nomination for Broken Arrow remained the single moment his career showed everything he was capable of. The studio had spent the rest of that decade selling the image rather than developing the actor behind it. 7. Randolph Scott, 6 feet 4 inches. George Randolph Scott was born in January 1898 in Orange, Virginia, into a family whose estate had come through the Civil War and its long aftermath largely whole. Randolph Scott studied at Georgia Tech and the University of North Carolina before heading west to Los Angeles. He built his way into the industry through physicality, horsemanship, and a well-timed introduction to Howard Hughes that cracked open the first doors. The man stood 6 feet 4 inches. Early Hollywood slotted him into romantic leads, which fit well enough. He shared an apartment with Cary Grant. A Fact Fan magazines mentioned with a studied vagueness the studios never bothered to clarify. He worked opposite Irene Dunne, Barbara Stanwyck, and Marlene Dietrich, and brought a natural ease to the camera that made the actor and the character feel like the same person. By the mid-1940s, Scott had found his true territory, the Western. He wasn't the only tall man riding those ranges. He was simply the most controlled. Where Wayne brought scale and forward momentum, Scott brought stillness. Where Walker offered physical spectacle, Scott offered economy. The violence in his films landed harder because of how quietly it arrived. A large man at rest carries more threat than one already in motion. In 1962, Scott made his last picture, Ride the High Country, directed by Sam Peckinpah. He played an aging lawman tasked with guarding a gold shipment, with Joel McCrea alongside him as an equally weathered partner, operating on a different moral code. The film came in under $900,000. Critics who had watched Scott work through variations of the same role for 3 decades suddenly understood what all those years had been adding up to. It was a story about men who had survived past their own moment in history, and Scott played it like he'd spent 40 years getting ready for it. He walked away from the camera the moment it was done. No more films. He died in March 1987 at age 89, one of the wealthiest actors the studio era ever produced. He made the camera come to him, and for 6 decades, it did. Number 8. John Wayne, 6 feet 3 inches. There's one specific piece of information that cuts against the Wayne mythology, and it's worth sitting with. He wore lifts. Not necessarily in every production, not always, but the evidence is documented across enough separate accounts, from Bette Davis, from Rock Hudson, from Robert Mitchum, from wardrobe workers on his sets, to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as gossip. What makes this worth noting isn't what it says about Wayne as a man, but what it reveals about how Golden Age Hollywood constructed its images. Wayne was already genuinely tall. His World War II military paperwork listed him at 6 feet 3.3 inches. He wasn't trying to make a modest height look impressive. He was pushing an already impressive height towards something almost mythological, because the version of John Wayne the public knew, built over 2 decades of westerns, required a physical presence that even the actual John Wayne couldn't fully deliver on his own. Marion Robert Morrison was born in Winterset, Iowa, in 1907, the son of a druggist, and attended USC on a football scholarship. A boat accident cut short his athletic career and left him working as a prop man at Fox Film at the age of 22. John Ford spotted him and handed him a small part. A decade of B-westerns came next. Then Stagecoach in 1939 turned him into a star. Wayne became the defining American film hero of his generation through physical magnetism, a clear ideological identity, and an almost instinctive sense of what audiences needed from a man in the saddle. By Hollywood's own standards, he wasn't a technical actor with serious range. He knew it and said as much, describing what he did as reaction rather than performance. But inside the Western and the war film, nobody came close. The moment he walked on screen, everything else in the frame rearranged itself around him. Men who were objectively taller somehow looked smaller standing at his side. That wasn't a camera trick. It was something in the image itself. He actively sought out tall leading men, including Arness, whom he mentored, and Walker, who appeared alongside him with an enthusiasm, suggesting both personal preference and competitive strategy. He was never quite comfortable sharing a frame with someone who threatened his sense of scale. The lifts, the wide-brimmed hats, the wagon fitted with a specially raised roof, all of it was Wayne managing a situation he couldn't entirely control. He died in June 1979 from stomach cancer at 71. 179 films across 4 decades. The American Film Institute placed him 13th on their list of the greatest male stars in cinema history. The lifts were still in his shoes at the end. He was buried at the height he had always insisted on, 9. Raymond Burr. At 6 feet 2 inches, Raymond Burr presents a genuinely tricky problem in any honest accounting of Hollywood's tall men. And this is exactly the right moment to address it directly. He stood somewhere between 6 feet 2.5 and 6 feet 3, right at the edge of this conversation, not comfortably inside it. He's included here, not because he clears the threshold with certainty, but because of what his career reveals about the relationship between physical mass and perceived height. Leaving him out would mean skipping the most deliberate and sustained example of how the studio system used a large man's body to produce a specific emotional effect in an audience. Burr was born in New Westminster, British Columbia, in 1917. He was a heavy man, over 300 pounds at his peak, with a face the camera found naturally threatening. Those two qualities produced a decade of villain roles, starting in the mid-1940s. He played the corrupt district attorney in Pitfall. He played the obsessive stalker in Rear Window. He played Lars Thorwald in Rear Window, Hitchcock's killer glimpsed from across a courtyard, a character who appears in roughly 12 minutes of a 90-minute film and who audiences were still thinking about when they walked out. He played the relentless prosecutor in A Place in the Sunday. In every one of those roles, he was a man whose presence communicated danger without ever having to reach for it. What Burr grasped about his own body was something most actors never quite figured out. Height and mass are not the same thing, and they don't read the same way on camera. Height reshapes the geometry of a shot, stretching vertical space, altering the frame. Mass does something else entirely. It implies weight, consequence, a man who takes up more of the world than the people around him. When Burr walked into a scene, the scene shifted. Not in its staging, but in its feeling. In 1957, he was cast as Perry Mason, a criminal defense attorney who was physically commanding and morally unshakable, the standing opponent of every prosecutor who ever bent the truth to win a case. It was the complete opposite of every role he'd taken for the previous 10 years. His villains had been corrupted figures of authority. Mason was legitimate authority turned against corruption. Where those villains had used their size to threaten, Mason used his to shield. Perry Mason ran on CBS for 9 years and 271 episodes, and across every single one of them, Burr's character never lost a case. That premise wasn't realistic, and nobody pretended otherwise. It was a weekly argument about what justice was actually supposed to look like, made by a large man who believed in the law without a trace of cynicism. Burr died in September 1993 and is buried in an orchard on a ranch in Northern California that he'd kept and worked for years. There's no monument visible from the road. Critics tend to remember him for the cold-eyed villains he played through the 1940s and 50s. Everyone else remembers him for the good man he played for 9 straight years. Both memories are right, and together they tell the whole story. If you've enjoyed this look at one of Hollywood's most fascinating careers, hit subscribe and drop a comment below with your favorite Raymond Burr performance. There's plenty more Golden Age Hollywood history coming your way, so see you in the next one.